Hello, my name is Indah Andryani. Today, I would like to talk about the introduction of the optimality theory. Let me share my screen first. Okay, the introduction of the optimality theory by Indah Andryani, myself. Okay, in this time, the optimality theory, this introduction is to introduce the students to the current dominant theory of the phonology. In this presentation, I would like to share four main things. The first is the introduction, and then followed by the architecture of the optimality theory or the OT itself. And the third, I would like to introduce about the markedness and faithfulness constraints. And in the end, we will find out how the OT works. Okay, talking about the optimality theory, obviously, we will find out the diversity of the variation candidates later on, or sounding or phonological candidates. Okay, so in this optimality theory, was introduced to a formal theory of linguistic typology. Okay, the optimality theory is widely adopted by scholars, not only in the area of the phonology, where OT was initially developed and applied, but also in the other areas of linguistic studies, such as the syntax and semantics. There were scholars contribute significantly to the OT or optimality theory. I would like to introduce these four scholars. The first was Alan Prince from the Rutgers University and Paul Smolensky from Johns Hopkins University. Both of them introduced the optimality theory as the framework for linguistic analysis. It was in 1993. And then followed by someone who's popular with us also when we learn about the optimality theory, there was Reinkiger. Yeah, Reinkiger in 1999, he gave a very useful and structured introduction to the theory into a book. Rein from Utrecht University. And then in 2001, there was John McCarthy from the University of Massachusetts. He expanded the theory of Alan Prince and Paul Smolensky of the optimality theory. Okay, now we are going to see the architecture of the OT. The phonological constraints, so we are going to, if we talk about the optimality theory, so we are talking about the constraints. The phonological constraints are ranked and violable to the phonetic forms. The violation of the constraint determines the best output of the grammar. Yeah, let me introduce you for the four terms of the OT. The first, we call it as the lex, stands for lexicon. It is the input. It is the words that we will later on evaluate it. Yeah, and then the input will be taken to the gen or generator. Later on, this gen will produce the candidates, the possible candidates. And then the candidates, for example, the word of the dogs with the plural suffix s, right? And then later on, the dogs as the input, and then later on will be taken into the gen and will produce candidates, can be dogs, can be dogs, can be dogs, and this all later on will be evaluated into the eval or evaluator to choose the optimal candidate. And then later on, in this evaluation, we will find the constraints, or these constraints are two. The first, markedness, and the faithfulness. Okay, so it's like this. This is the input. For example, the dogs with the plural suffix s, and then it will be taken to the gen and will produce candidates, and then it will be evaluated and then produce the output or the optimal choice of the input later on. It is dogs. Okay. So these are the main process of the to find out or to get the optimal choice later on. Yeah. And sorry. Yeah, the main things that we need to underline when we evaluate it is the constraints. Constraints are violable, but violation must be minimal. And then another one, we need to see the ranking process of the constraints, because it's very crucial to get the optimal output. Okay, so here it is. So for example, we take an example, Kela. Kela is the Hindi word, means banana. So Kela as the input, Kela in here is the input, and will be taken to the generator and will produce 5 candidates: Kela, Kila, Kola, Kula, Kala. And then later on, these candidates will be evaluated in the constraints, evaluated here. And then later on, we'll produce the output, one output, or the optimal choice, yeah, or candidate. In this case, Kela, out of 5 candidates, is the optimal candidate. Okay, now we are going to the eval or evaluation of the markedness and faithfulness. This was introduced by Reinkiger, that in eval faithfulness, he set the rule. The rule: syllables must have onsets. Vowel must not be nasal. Obstruents must be voiced after the nasal. And then also he said the rule: the output must present all segments present in the input. Output segments must have counterparts in the input, and the output must present the linear order of segments in the input. Okay, let's see how the OT works. We find out markedness and faithfulness constraint. In this, markedness constraint means the voice we regularly, or the correspondent regularly hear it. Yeah, and then faithfulness, we can find out the evaluation of the max or maximize IO, input output. In this time, we cannot hear deletion. We cannot hear the deletion. If there is a deletion in the phonetical sound when the correspondent pronounce it, it means it's forbidden. Later we will mark it in the table. And then depth or dependent IO. Dependent IO means prevent the insertion or adding the sound. In this part, if there is an insertion or an adding, then it will be forbidden in the table or in the evaluation. And then we also find ident IO, or the correspondent usually hear it, like is we can agree with the sound by if it's pronounced by a correspondent. Okay, let's see. I have prepared these two inputs. The first is books with the plural suffix, also with the dogs as the plural suffix. First, books. In here, the input is books, and it will be taken to the generator and will produce 4 candidates, A, B, C, D, 4 candidates. The first is bookies, the second books, the third books with a Z, and then book. Now, in these 4 candidates, we find that the fourth candidate, there is a deletion. We cannot hear, it means we cannot hear the S, the plural suffix, we cannot hear. That's why forbidden here, we mark here. And then if there is an insertion or adding like bookies, it shouldn't be E sound in the books, right, from the input. So forbidden here, we mark here. And then for the markedness constraint here, so we usually that books, like books, or we here as the books because the plural same, and there is S, there is Z there, so we agree that it is books. Yeah, this is the agree sound. Yes, so the output is books, while in this input like dogs, right? And then the input dogs will be taken into the generator and will produce 4 candidates as well. This dogs with the Z, and dog. So of course, because this is a missing, or there is a deletion of the dog, there is no plural suffix, then these 4 candidates got forbidden or marked in the max IO because there is a deletion. It shouldn't be there. Okay, then also there is an insertion or adding to the E sound. That's why the first candidate got forbidden in depth IO. And then in here, the dogs with the S, no choices, because because it is regularly, we don't hear it as the dogs. So yeah, and so it is heard as the correspondent regularly hear it as the dogs with S, and then also then IO also with the S. Okay, that's the explanation for me. Thank you very much, and thank you.